Welcome to the Having It All podcast, the show about what it takes to live an abundant, loving life. My name is Matthew Bivens, and each week I'm helping you get out of your head so that you can truly have it all. Let's do it. Hey everyone, Matthew Bivens here, and welcome to another episode of the Having It All podcast. Today I wanted to share some quick thoughts on consistency. So last week was July 4th, and here in Atlanta there's this huge 10K called the Peachtree road race that is run every July 4th morning. Sarah and I have been running this race for 5 years, and it's one of my favorite events each year, and I think it's actually one of the biggest 10Ks in the country. So, tens of thousands of people show up to this thing. It's held throughout the streets of Midtown Atlanta. It's just this awesome event. So this year, we were running, and we finished the race, and it was awesome. And I had a friend of mine. He's actually been on this podcast before, and he said, "Hey, look out for me during the race. I'm going to be running." And so as we're walking back to grab the subway back home, we pass our friend Robert, or he passes us actually. And he's just moving. He's getting it. He's running. He's probably on mile 5, closing on that last mile, and just big smile on his face, and he's looking great. Now, what's so, I think, amazing about Robert and why he, to me, is a model of consistency is because 1 year ago, it looked very different when he was running the Peachtree road race. So, like I said, Robert has been a guest on this podcast before. It was actually about a year ago, in July 2016, that he was on, and his episode is called, it's fittingly called, "You Have to Move Your Feet," a story about seeing the beauty in all of life's circumstances. So Robert is a big guy, and I think at his biggest he was close to 300 pounds. And so over the past year, he has been consistent in showing up for himself and showing up for his health. And the way what that has resulted in is what I saw last week in the Peachtree. This man running at mile 5. He wasn't walking. He wasn't being dragged along. He was running almost at the end of this race, smile on his face. He had enough breath to shout at us when we saw him, and he was doing it with much more joy and peace and flow than he was last year. And now I have witnessed Robert's consistency over the past 12 months. He shows up every week to the fitness class that I teach, and he is just a ball of light and energy every week. And I've seen him show up no matter what type of circumstance is going on in his life, whether it's a work circumstance, a traffic circumstance, whether he's just not feeling great. He shows up even on the days when he didn't have the healthiest of lunch, and he knows that it's probably going to come back to bite him in the butt. He shows up. Robert is consistent. And he's, I see him every week, but he's also texted me these different reminders, these different photos of him. He shared a photo of himself last year running the Peachtree, and then a photo of himself this year. And it's absolutely remarkable, the difference. And when you see Robert today, if you've known him, you'd say, "Oh my gosh, Robert, you look fantastic. What have you been doing?" And all of these major health shifts in his life have just been an example of his consistency. And so, I really just wanted to share Robert's story, particularly around him being able to run this race, because it took 365 days of consistency for him to get where he is today. It was not an overnight thing. It was not, waking up a few times and experiencing these miraculous changes. It was making the choice every day to show up powerfully for himself in some way. And sometimes the showing up powerfully for yourself means forgiving yourself when you have a meal that you know probably isn't gonna increase your health, or forgiving yourself when you don't make it for a workout. You know what I mean? Like, Robert has overall been very consistent, but absolutely throughout the past year, there's been meals that he probably wouldn't eat again, or maybe he will eat them again, and just knowing that they might take him a step backwards, and that's okay. I think overall you want to make sure that you are taking those steps in the right direction, but you also have to build in a little bit of leniency for yourself. And so I use Robert as an example in my own personal life when I have some sort of goal, understanding that each day I'm taking one tiny step towards that goal. And I have to remind myself to be patient. And I have to remind myself that the process is part of the magic as well. We all want to get to that end goal. We all want to be able to run the Peachtree metaphorically. But it's also in the process that we can find peace, joy, and really a lot of fulfillment. And I see that in Robert. I see that he really has embraced the process, because that's an amazing experience in and of itself. That's where the growth happens. That's where the healing happens. That's where the transformation happens. And it's in that process that I think if we become a little bit more aware of how we're showing up, it creates a more enjoyable experience. So I invite you to do a small self-assessment and think about one small, simple area in your life where you would like to create more consistency. Maybe right now you're thinking, I'd love to be more consistent in working out. And you think to yourself, I need to work out every day. But currently you're working out once every 2 weeks. If that's the case, then start simple. Start with something very simple. Give yourself the opportunity to have wins. It's important that we create the opportunities for us to have those wins. If you set your consistency goal too high and you're unable to hit it, it's not because you're a failure. It's not because you're just a crappy person or you don't really love yourself. You might have just set a goal that was a bit too high. I'll give you an example. I wanted to record an episode of this podcast and publish it every day for a week. That was my goal. I wanted to crank out an episode every day for a week. Now, this show publishes weekly. I do one episode a week. So to go from 1 to 7, probably the bar is a little bit too high. I can start out by saying, all right, I want to go from 1 episode to 2 episodes, and then 2 episodes to 3 episodes, and give myself the opportunity to have that small win and build up the momentum. It's so important. It's so important that we don't set ourselves up for failure from the beginning. So this week, today, whenever you're thinking about it and you are thinking about how you can become more consistent, just think about making that one tiny step in the right direction, and build that momentum from there. So if you haven't listened to Robert's story, it really is fantastic. That man he just has an incredible story. And so I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes. You can find the show notes for this episode over at firesidenetwork.com. That's where the Having It All podcast lives. If you have an example of consistency or a story on consistency and you want to share it with me, I would absolutely love to hear it. And you can email me directly at mattcbivens@gmail.com. And that is going to be it for today. We're going to keep it nice and short. So with that, my name is Matthew Bivens, and here is to you having it all.